Good evening, good evening, good evening to all those who are in the building and to all those who are joining us online. We are honored that you have taken this opportunity to tune in to be a part of this special presentation. We shared this past Sunday, and we've been sharing over the last few weeks that there have been recent changes to gun laws, especially in the state of Florida. And for some, in their minds, that means that we are the wild, wild west, that you can do anything you want to do, any way that you would like to do it. But we have learned that there still exists some very severe, specific, and dire consequences to mishandling firearms in the state of Florida. So I want you to share this post for anyone, not only folks who are gun owners, not only people who in the past may have had a concealed carry permit or the desire to carry a concealed weapon, but perhaps you're a parent or a grandparent and you have some younger people in your life, either legally or illegally, who may be in possession of firearms. You need to know what the laws are as it relates to handling firearms in the state of Florida. And we're going to learn about that tonight in this special town hall. Again, take a moment to hit like, hit love, hit share. Please say hello so that we know who you are. Some quick ground rules for those who are in the building and for our special guests. Those joining us online, if there is a question that you have, you can post that question in the chat. If it is a sensitive question, you can send a direct message either to my personal page or the church's page. We're on 3 different media outlets tonight, so I encourage you to do that. Those in the building, if you have a question, please state that question nice and clear, not just so that we can get it on the internet and on the live stream, but so that our special guests will be able to repeat your question so that the folks at home will know exactly what it is that you are asking. Let's pray, and then I want to introduce our special guests who are going to lead us in this discussion tonight. Lord, we're thankful that we have this opportunity to come together and to learn about things that affect us as a community and as individual citizens. Thank you for this great country. Thank you for this great state and this community. Help us to do our due diligence in understanding ways to better protect ourselves along with our civil liberties. Bless this time that we spend together tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. We have been privileged down through the years now to partner with the Glassman and Zissimopoulos law firm. They have been such a blessing and benediction to me and to our church. And this is the 3rd leg of our workshop series for this year, and we're honored to spend this time with them. One of the partners is here with us tonight. I'm going to have him come now as we introduce him to you, Mr. Nick Zissimopoulos, my great friend who's been such a blessing to us. Would you help me welcome him with a rousing round of applause, and he will lead us now.
Thank you, Pastor Thorpe. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here tonight with everyone. I was here a few months ago, some familiar faces in the crowd, and one of the things I was so excited about, in addition to being able to share some knowledge and answer some questions and be part of this community, was I'm on YouTube, and my kids get to see I'm a YouTube star now, right? And I went home, and I showed them the video, and we watched it, and they were proud, but they did say, you don't dress as well as Pastor Thorpe. And I said, that's true. So I said to my wife, pick out a good pair of jeans and some fancy shoes and see if I can do better. And I think I did better, but I can't, I cannot beat you, my friend. So but it is a pleasure to be here tonight. If I can do anything in this discussion tonight, it's hopefully for the folks that are in this room and watching us at home and engaging us on social media, if we can just get some little piece of knowledge that you can take with you and share with you as you talk with your friends, your family, your kids, your grandkids. I really am getting tired, if I'm being honest, of watching kids throw their life away at 18 or 19. And I apologize if I'm a little emotional about it, but it breaks my heart. And I've had to represent kids, and I've been in court, and I want it to stop. I want gun violence to stop. I'm not anti-firearm. I think firearms have their place. But hopefully some of the information we can pass on tonight can be helpful for this. So we've prepared this presentation, and with that, if we can have the first slide. The presentation is Gambling with Guns, a Bad Bet. And what we're going to do throughout the course, we can go to the next slide here, is this is an overview of what I want to do throughout the course of this talk. Who can have a gun? Who can get a gun? What are some of the recent changes to Florida law, especially with how a gun can be carried? And then I want to show some real-life examples. I want to empower with some knowledge of how a gun can take a situation that's bad and make it life-changing in ways that we can't possibly imagine, okay? And please, if you have questions throughout this, raise those hands. That was one of my favorite parts of being part of this community last time and talking with this church, was being able to answer some questions. So please let me know if you have questions. So who can purchase a firearm? Well, in the state of Florida, you have to be at least 21 years old. For handguns, you have to be a Florida resident. For long guns, you can be a person, a resident of another state. And if you're a permanent resident with a valid alien registration, you can have one. So what this means, if you know an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old, there's no purchasing firearms. And I do want to say that it is a crime to purchase a firearm for someone else if you're not intending to have it for yourself. Now, you can gift a firearm, okay, but you cannot purchase a firearm and fill out the application saying, this is for me, if you know you intend to give it to someone else. So if you're over 21 or you know someone who's over 21 who thinks, hey, this is a good way to make a little extra money, I'll go buy a firearm and then go give it to a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old, they could be finding themselves in a lot of hot water very quickly. We'll go to the next slide. Waiting periods. So there are good reasons for waiting periods, right? We don't want people who are angry, who maybe are in a heated domestic situation, or are angry at someone at work, or angry at something in the world, to go get a firearm very quickly, especially if they don't have training. So Florida law says that you need to wait 3 days, okay? So if you go to a store and you say, I want to buy a firearm, and you fill out the application, there will be a 3-day waiting period. Now, certain local governments, like Alachua County, can extend that, and Alachua County does extend that. That's a 5-day waiting period. If you have a valid concealed weapon permit, that is waived, so you don't have to wait. Now, some people think they've completely gotten away with and done away with the concealed weapons permits. That's not true. There actually is still a concealed weapons permit in the state of Florida. We're going to talk more about the changes. And one of the major advantages that people see to having a concealed weapons permit is there's no waiting period. One of the big advantages I see to a concealed weapons permit is the education portion of it. There's a class that a person has to take in order to get a concealed weapons permit. And it trains folks about the dangers that firearms pose, the way that they are a tool, but a very dangerous tool. And there's a classroom component and a target component. So if you do know someone who meets the requirements to get a firearm and they're going to have one, I would highly encourage they still do the concealed weapons permit class. And this is one of the reasons. You can go to the next slide, please. Who cannot have a firearm? That's a long list. When I was asking Miss Annette, and I have a coworker named Sarah who is very good with editing. She's our proofreader. And I gave her this, and I said, can you please proofread this? I want to make sure I don't have typos when I come here. And Sarah looked at it and said, well, you have some things in yellow and some not. Is that purposeful? And it is. Because I tried to highlight the things that I think may be more common in our lives as problems, okay? So, if you know someone who's a convicted felon, even if it's 10, 15, 20, 40 years ago, they cannot possess a firearm. And to do so as a new felony, where you can get up to 15 years in prison. And then if you are actually holding a firearm as a felon, that's 3 years of mandatory prison. So if you know someone who is a felon, maybe it was a simple mistake years ago and they've moved their life on and they've, rehabilitated and they're successful and they've changed their ways, they cannot have a firearm and they risk going to prison if they do that, okay? One example of where this sometimes comes up, this has happened. I've seen this before. People say, well, I know I'm a felon, I can't have a firearm. Then they have a family member who passes away, and they inherit the stuff from their family member, and they say, oh, this is a firearm, I know I can't have it. And I've seen this case. They take the firearm to the pawn shop to get rid of it. And they're not doing anything wrong in their mind, and they put their fingerprint on it. That is now a felon in possession of a firearm. So if you know a felon, do not let them in any way take possession of a firearm, because it is a very serious thing. And again, there's a laundry list of things, but the next one that's highlighted, I really want to talk about this one because this is very serious. Maybe someone might know someone who has a firearm who also has used marijuana or uses marijuana, right? Maybe you think of, maybe there's a kid that you know or a young person you know who likes firearms but also, uses marijuana. And maybe they even have is this okay? Even they have a medical marijuana license where, from their point of view, in their mind, it's legal for them to have marijuana, and they meet the qualifications to have a firearm. Under federal law, it is technically still illegal to have marijuana. So under federal law, in my opinion, and the way I'm advising people, until we get a change in the federal law or the Supreme Court changes things, you should not have marijuana and a firearm. Now, I might get some pushback on that. And some people might say, but hey, wasn't there the agricultural commissioner a couple years ago who said it was okay? Yes, there was. Her name is Nikki Fried. And I know Nikki. Good commissioner. I actually went to undergrad with Nikki back in 1995, so I've known Nikki for a long time. Fine that she said that. I disagree with her, and I've practiced in federal court. I have read cases where people were stopped with a firearm that they had lawfully. They also had marijuana. They were arrested, indicted federally, and faced a federal felony where they could have gone to prison for years and years and years. So my advice, if you are going to use marijuana legally, even with a medical marijuana card, until the law and the federal level is changed, choose one or the other. Guns or marijuana, the two don't mix, okay? I think that's an important message that I want to get out to as many people as I can, because I don't want anyone to fall into that trap. Anyone who has a protective order against them, injunctions. And this is even for temporary injunctions. If you know a person who is facing an injunction for domestic violence or something like that, they cannot possess firearms. This is a tricky one. Convicted of a misdemeanor if it involves domestic violence. So you wouldn't think of that, right? You would think, well, I heard felons can't have guns, but what about misdemeanors? If you know someone who's been convicted of a misdemeanor act of domestic violence, again, could have been 15, 20, 25 years ago, under federal law, you cannot have a firearm. And these are tricky little situations that I want people to stay out of because I don't want to expose being federally indicted. Juveniles who maybe they don't have a felony conviction, but they haven't turned 24 and they had some juvenile history where they were adjudicated delinquent. You want to stay away from that. And then certain restrictions on getting firearms, even if you were on probation for a felony but were not convicted, okay? So the point here is there are lots, if I'm getting anything across, firearms are fine, there's definitely a use for them, but there are lots of traps where people can get hemmed up and get caught in the system for possessing a firearm, maybe when they don't think, oh, I shouldn't be using this. Just be very careful. And I've always said this, if you have any questions about whether or not you can legally possess a firearm, get with Pastor Thorpe. He'll have my number. You can call me anytime. Run the facts by me, and I'll tell you I think you can or I think you can't. And that goes for everyone in here and everyone who's watching us out in the social media world. Call me. I won't charge anything to do that. I'll be happy to answer that question. Yes, sir.
Just real quick, does it matter if the misdemeanor crime or domestic violence is expunged? You know, with the federal government, I mean, things is always there.
It's a great question. It's a great question. So the question, just to repeat it so everyone out in the YouTube hears it, is, does it matter for the misdemeanor crime of domestic violence if it was expunged? So if you get, in the law we have something called withholds of adjudication in Florida. That means you went on probation, but you weren't technically convicted. In Florida, you cannot expunge a withhold of adjudication, okay? However, currently, I always like to say as of October 11th, 2023, a withhold of adjudication in the federal system is not called a conviction. So if you got a domestic violence charge several years ago and you did your probation and it's a misdemeanor and you got a withhold, if you don't have anything else, you could possess a firearm under the law. If you're adjudicated guilty of that, number one, you wouldn't be able to get it expunged, and number two, you'd still not be able to possess firearms under federal law. Does that make sense? And that's a great question. And sometimes people don't remember, did I get a withhold or did I get an adjudication of guilt? Again, call me, get my number, call me. If it's in Alachua County, I can look it up and usually tell you within 5 minutes, oh, this was a withhold, this was an adjudication, and we can talk that through so you know if you're not walking into a trap. Okay? Great question. All right. Recent changes in the law. All right. The law has certainly changed so that more people can now have firearms and we not know about it, right? And some people think this is a great thing. You'll hear this called constitutional carry. The nice thing about the concealed weapons permit law, in my opinion, was the education course. That we had a system in place where people could defend themselves, but they had to go learn about the dangers of firearms and show some proficiency with shooting a firearm. And if anyone in this room has ever used a firearm, it's not something that comes natural. It is something that takes training. Everyone can learn how to do it, but it takes training. So starting on July 21st of 2023, a person can carry a concealed firearm without a license, provided that they meet certain criteria. And some of these criteria are very important, especially for the young people in your life. Let's go to the next slide. And again, you see my random yellow highlights that Sarah mentioned. But the first one I really want to talk about is you got to be 21 years old or older. You got to be over 21 to take advantage of this new law. I had to do a double take the other day because I was looking at a more recent police report and they had charged someone with possessing a concealed firearm. And I said, wait a second, that's not even against the law anymore. And then I looked and it was a young person. It was a 19-year-old. So I'm here to tell you that here in Alachua County, okay, they don't care that a 21-year-old can do it. If you're young and somehow maybe your parents are playing this in the background, they will come after you if you are carrying a firearm in a concealed fashion. They will come after you. And they can put you into prison for up to 5 years. This is still serious, and I think the problem is everyone kind of just hears. I'm a lawyer who studies this, and I was shocked by it. A lot of people hear, oh, yeah, everyone can conceal. No, it's if you're 21 or older. So if children out there, young people, even young adults, cannot carry in a concealed manner without a permit. Again, you see where it pops up. You can't be chronically or habitually use alcoholic beverages to the extent of impairing normal faculties. So I guess if you see someone walking out of a bar every night, that's probably you're not the person. You could be convicted technically of carrying a concealed firearm. You can't be in possession of drugs or a controlled substance. I'm going to tell you that's going to be that you're going to see prosecutions for that. You're going to see people who are found with firearms and also found with some marijuana, and they are going to prosecute them under this law. Okay, so you just got to tell people, if anything, drugs and guns don't mix. Booze and guns don't mix for a variety of reasons. But really, I think my opinion is the legislature has built things in here, traps. Hey, everyone can carry firearms. No, there are a lot of little traps here, and everyone needs to be aware of those. And then there are restrictions even for 3 years after, even if you get those withholds of adjudication, there are restrictions for years about whether or not you can do this. So again, watch for these traps. Go to the next one. There are also lots of places you can't carry them. So this whole constitutional carry them wherever you want to. No, not exactly. And look at the places where you can't carry them. Places like the legislature, right? Can't carry them there. So it's not so constitutional carry there. Courthouses, police stations. And I'm not saying I disagree with any of this, but when the advertisements are, we're open and we're free and you can carry, not really. Not really. So if anyone says, I don't need a permit, it's constitutional carry now, say, well, wait a second. Have you made sure you're not going to one of these many places? Obviously, don't go to an airport with a firearm. I hope everyone knows that. But there are lots of places. Not any portion of an establishment licensed to dispense alcoholic beverages, right? I don't know if that means like you walk into Chili's, you can take your gun to the place where the booths are, but not the bar. I don't know. I know my advice would be don't take your gun into that restaurant. Obviously, no schools. No governing bodies, no polling places, and yes, certainly do not bring guns into. If you happen to find yourself in a police station, that would be a very bad thing to do. All right, thank you. We'll go to the next one. There is no open carry. Okay, so if someone goes, you can carry a gun all you want, let them know. Hey, no. We don't have open carry now. We're not the Wild West where everyone's got their holster and the gun's visible. And you see sometimes on social media what that looks like in other states. And I'm going to be honest, it's a little nerve-wracking when I see it, and I'm not anti-firearm. In Florida, we do not have open carry. All right, so I'm going to run through a few of these, and I'm going to give them a few minutes heads notice. I brought, one of my friends came with me today, Evans, Pierre, and Tuan. Evans is a local criminal defense lawyer and a man that I've known for several years, a man of high character and an excellent lawyer who really cares about his clients. And the good news is he's going to be running for state attorney next year, so you'll be hearing his name a lot. What I'm going to try to do now, and when I'm done, Evans will come up and give maybe an example of a situation like this that he may have seen. I'm going to run through Florida's 1020 life statute. Has anyone ever heard of 1020 life? No. It's been around for a while. And my hope here with this, if I'm being completely honest, is that this impacts someone's life where they can hear this, or you can catch something from this, repeat it to a young person, and show them a concrete example of how a gun is a bad bet and how it just increases everything and it makes everything else more serious. So what this statute did, the 1020 life statute years ago, is it created mandatory minimums. That means if you are convicted of a crime involving a firearm, you must either be sentenced to 10 years in prison if you were holding the firearm during the crime, 20 years in prison if you discharge or fire the firearm during the commission of the crime, or 25 years to life if you shoot someone. Even if they don't die, if you shoot someone during the commission of one of these crimes. Let me give you some examples. We'll start with the next one. Okay, and then these are the examples. Battery. Okay, what's a battery? A battery is an intentional, unconsented to touching. All right? Everyone thinks a battery is like a closed fist punch. That is a battery. But this is also a battery, like a poke. That's a battery. An intentional, unconsented to touching. I intend to touch. It's not consented. I touch you. That's a battery. It's a misdemeanor. By the way, I'm not encouraging anyone to commit the misdemeanors, all right? I'm not encouraging batteries. It's still something you don't want to do. I feel like I should say that. I touch someone intentionally against their will, I could go to jail for a year, right? Normally, if I don't have any history and no one's really hurt, I'm not going to go to jail for a year. Probably going to get some, first-time offender lenient treatment. But, listen, I'm still not encouraging it. Now, let's say I'm holding a gun when I do that, okay? Let's say I walk up to you and I bump you right there. I don't really hurt you. I just hit you in the side of the head with a gun. Not too hard, just a little tap. 10 years in prison. All right? They could sentence me to 10 years in prison. You see the escalation there with the firearm? Again, I'm not encouraging anyone to settle things with fists. That's not me. I think, I have 8-year-old boys at home, and I'm encouraging to settle things with words. With words. Which is obviously, honestly, tougher. And it takes more time, and you got to work on that. But I'm not encouraging fists. But the difference between a punch and a punch with a gun. We didn't shoot the person. We didn't fire the gun. Right now, we just hit them with the gun. 10 years prison. Now, let's say in the course of hitting them with the gun, I fire off a round. 20 years prison. 20 years in prison. So let's say you're 17 years old and you're thinking about doing something like this. Go with some friends to do this. You will lose high school graduation. You will lose all of your 20s. You will lose most of your 30s for hitting someone with a gun. And that to me is just devastating, right? Devastating. Now, let's say in that action, I go and I take the gun and I hit the person and it discharges and I fire a round off in their leg. They live, but now they've been shot in the leg. That's serious injury. 25 years to life. Life. So when the judge says life, you lose high school graduation, your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, your 70s, your 80s. And people say, well, is there a chance? Take the example to 18. So if you're 18, all that's gone. And they say, well, maybe you'll get parole. No. There's no good time. There's no parole. Yeah. That's a great question. That's a great question. And I thank you I had not planned on talking about that, but I appreciate you asking that. I want to answer it. And I want to repeat the question. What if it's self-defense? I've worked cases before where someone has used a firearm and they believe was self-defense. The most important word when it comes to self-defense is reasonableness. And the reasonableness will be judged by people who weren't there. It's going to be judged by a detective who's going to come out. It's going to be judged by a prosecutor who's going to look at the moment that you're in, but in this sort of cold, sterile world where they're at their desk trying to decide if what you did was reasonable. It's going to be judged by a judge, right? And then ultimately maybe by a jury. What I tell people is, we have a very strong self-defense law in the state of Florida. It's an immunity law. You have a right to, not just be attacked. You have a right to stand your ground. You've probably heard that before. Meet force with force. But it has to be a reasonable force. If a person comes up and pokes you, you can't go, bam. You can't, right? Did you like my gunshot sound? But it becomes more difficult, right? You have cases sometimes where maybe what started as a fist fight escalates to something more. There's a case where a person was sitting in their car and another person came over and started smashing the windshield. And they had a fight beforehand. And the question was it reasonable when the person inside the car decided to shoot? And ultimately law enforcement said no, it wasn't reasonable. And a prosecutor said no, it wasn't reasonable. And then, so then that person is facing, well, do you want to go risk with the jury to see if it's reasonable? And so what I tell people, it's an excellent question, I'm glad you asked it. Guns make everything more serious. Guns are not a good bet. Now, if you have to use it because you feel like, I'm being attacked with deadly force, hopefully you've been trained, hopefully you have the firearm lawfully, and you use the firearm to defend yourself, then you may be okay. But some people who are not there are going to be making that decision. And I do want to say this. If you are doing something illegal and you don't have the firearm lawfully, you don't get the benefit of the stand your ground law. So part of the being able to use the stand your ground law is you've got to be in a place where you're lawfully allowed to be, and you have to be not engaging in any criminal activity. So if you are a convicted felon who's holding a firearm, you might be able to argue self-defense to a jury, but you're not going to be able to argue stand your ground. It's an excellent question. I appreciate you asking that. All right, let's talk about burglary. Again, I am in no way encouraging burglary. I feel like I need to say that every time. Burglary is a very serious offense, by the way. Burglary is entering different structures. For the purpose of this, it's entering a occupied residence with the intent to commit an offense inside that. Sometimes we have to talk to prosecutors in town and say, it wasn't a burglary because it was a drunk college student who just went into the wrong apartment. That does happen, believe it or not. Okay, that's not a burglary. That's like a drunk idiot. That's trespass. Can we just, disorderly conduct, let's move on. But if a person enters a residence with the intent to commit an offense therein, to steal something, to hit someone, that's a very serious offense. And I would definitely discourage people from doing that because, to your point, once a person unlawfully enters your home, I think just about every police officer and state attorney would say, as long as you were just in your home, you have just about green light to defend yourself in your home how you need to. The home is one of the most protected places for defending yourself. Well, let's say a person does commit a burglary of a residence. Again, serious offense, felony, and could get up to 15 years of prison. That's a lot of prison. And the guideline would be 2 years of prison. So again, you break into someone's home, if you're lucky enough to make it out of that home, and you're caught, you're going to prison. But let's talk about if you do it with a gun. That's the point I'm trying to make here, is how everything becomes more serious. If you do it with a gun, 10 years, day for day, no credit time off, no good behavior time, 10 years, up to life. Now, what if you walk in with no gun? You walk in, you think, that's a good home. I know they've got some fun things in there. They got toys. I want the toys they have. And when you walk in there, you go, ooh, they have a gun. And you take their gun. That's burglary with a firearm. Even though you didn't walk into the home with a gun, even though you were really looking to get their jewelry or their money or their toys, whatever it was, their video game system, but you just stumble upon a gun. Now you are committing burglary with a firearm, and you will go to prison for 10 years. So if you're 19 years old, you're not going to college. You're not going to meet a special someone in your 20s and start a young family. You're going to be in prison for 10 years. And if you get the wrong judge and they go, life, you're going to be gone for your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s. Right? That's burglary. Assault. And this is the last one, and then we'll bring up Evans to see if he's got any to share with you. Assault. This happens in cars all the time. It's a place of worship, so I won't say the things that are usually said. Assault is doing something that puts someone in fear of imminent harm. All right? Happens in cars. People make certain gestures to each other or say certain words to each other. Could be an assault. Verbally yelling at someone if you're close to them where you put them in fear. Even maybe like starting to throw a punch and not throwing it. That would be an assault. That's a misdemeanor. Again, not encouraging it. 60 days in jail. Again, I don't want to do like an hour in jail, okay? I'm not saying that that's great. Like, 60 days. Maybe if they took my cell phone and I didn't have to do emails for a day or two, maybe. No, I'm just kidding. 60 days in jail. One of the, believe it or not, least serious crimes we have. It's a second-degree misdemeanor. It's a very minor misdemeanor. Again, not encouraging it. You say the same words. You make the same actions. Holding a gun, not shooting a gun. I'm not talking about shooting a gun. I'm not talking about shooting someone with a gun. I'm saying do the same thing holding a gun, 5 years in prison. So I hope these few examples have shown that guns just make everything more serious. and that, I'm not anti-gun. As a matter of fact, I am pro taking classes and learning how to use the tool and, protecting yourself if it's reasonable, right? I am pro that. I want everyone to be safe and educated. But especially for young kids and for young people, I really want to give some information about how messing with guns and doing anything that is criminal with a gun is a ticket to losing time. And it is, in my opinion, a really bad bet. All right. Evans, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add.
Thank you, Nick. Good evening, everyone. I, as well, I'm not anti-gun as well. I'm from the D.C. area, and I was introduced to venison, and I discovered how good deer meat tastes. So after that, I was okay with guns. I just want to share a story. I had a case in Jacksonville. I represented a young man who was 17 years old who happened to do a burglary in Duval County. And this young man, African-American young man, 17 years old, committed this burglary. And the elected prosecutor at the time was Angela Corey. She direct filed on him. And, one of the most important things that you're hearing that Nick talked about, he hasn't said it directly, but discretion is extremely important. Yes, ma'am? Direct file means that if you commit a crime as a juvenile, they upmand it, they increase the exposure to the adult world. So you're exposed to a lot more time and incarceration, et cetera. So what happened was this young man went into a house, and I'm glad Nick went over the committing a burglary and stealing guns. So the charge was not just burglary. If it was a burglary, his sentence would have been, it would have been kept as a juvenile, and more than likely he would have been put in place on probation because he's never been in trouble before. I think the only time he really got in trouble was he got a juvenile deferred for stealing a candy from Walmart. That's his history. And so they direct filed it with burglary while armed and subject this young man to 10-20 life. And the thing that broke my heart was that this young man was excited about graduating high school. And he was about to graduate. He was working in the jail. And I mean, you saw, when you see light in the young man's eyes, he was excited about the future. And Jacksonville is a little different. I remember we're able to status cases with the judges. Now, this young man confessed to taking the guns, told law enforcement this is where they were buried. He admitted to everything, cooperated, everything. He did what his mother told him to do. And I remember I'm talking to the prosecutor, and again, discretion is important. The prosecutor in charge of the case, she was helpless. She told me even, I wish I could do something different, but I can't. My hands are tied. I talked to the judge. Now, the judge has discretion as well. The judge could, even if he was direct file 10-20 life, being his age, he could have been sentenced as a useful offender and would have been sentenced to probation or what have you. I remember the conversation I had with the judge went like this. I asked the judge, or we were talking with the prosecutor, because we know 10, minimum is 10. And, would you be willing to do something other than 10? Why don't we, I'm not asking for complete exoneration. I'm asking for maybe a couple years with long-term probation. This judge told me if I would plead open, he would give him 20. I remember, I will never forget this particular judge's name, Judge Sood. I mean, I'll never forget it. It took, we're in church, it took everything in my flesh to keep from saying what was in my mind, And, I'm thinking like maybe 2, 3, okay, no. They gave him 12 years. So think about it. Now, what's this young man going to look like after spending 12 years in prison? 10 years of it day for day, no credit. So one, I think it's important that we get our young people, and like Nick talked about, we deal with young people making stupid mistakes and being caught up in the system. And a lot of times what happens is that by making these stupid mistakes using firearms, they're really putting their hands in they're putting their life in somebody else's hands. You know, you're relying on a prosecutor you're hoping would have wisdom, you know, where, you know, and the decision to put this young man in prison doesn't make economic sense, doesn't make any sort of sense. You talk about somebody who's about to graduate high school, you know. They never bothered to find out anything about this person. They would not listen. You know, so it's important that we get this message across to our children. I think one of the biggest problems I've had as an attorney in town is humanizing black boys in general. You know, what I've discovered, whether it's in Marion County or whatever county, is that the idea is that, oh, I dropped your water. But the idea is that, you know, we're not capable of fear. You know, we're not capable of expressing emotions or concern. And, you know, that's the reality of what we have to deal with. And we have to be mindful of that. And we got to prepare our kids in how to deal with, you know, the circumstances that they're in. You know, I mean, you know, things are not fair, but, you know, this day and age is about survival. So we have judges who are not exercising, you know, wisdom and this good discretion, and we have some prosecutors who are not as well. So we have to prepare them. So that's why I'm so happy when I heard Nick was talking about this presentation. We really got to equip our kids with the right decision-making ability. So it's important, and I hope, you know, if you guys have any questions, you know, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you guys have. Yes? If you're going to be using it as if you're using it, if I'm pointing at somebody, those are some consequences. So you just want to be responsible. I think having a firearm is it's a very important decision. I had a case a couple years ago where, and Nick talked about reasonableness, where this young man was about to, he really thought he was about to get beat up, and he did not. The issue was whether or not it was reasonable to shoot at this particular individual. And, you know, again, you're putting your life into somebody else's hands and try to place themselves in your position. You know, so you got to be really mindful of that when you make those type of decisions. Yes, sir.
Have you ever had a case where an individual was accused of waving a firearm, and what criteria did you use to prove that, you know, that you did it? How did you had 2 or 3 individuals in the car and say you did, but you didn't? How did you factor in getting that?
I haven't had that scenario, but I've had a scenario where a young man was charged with attempted murder. And you know, what happened was they were downtown, and the irony, I mean, he was we were blessed because the person who shot first met with the prosecutor, and very interesting story. He was subpoenaed and to meet with the prosecutor, and the prosecutor told the young man that you have immunity. And the young man said, I have immunity? And the prosecutor said, yes. And the young man told the prosecutor, well, I shot him first. Prosecutor's a judge now, so it was interesting. Now, here's the thing that was interesting, right? And we do have a stand your ground law. We actually had to have the hearing even after he told the prosecutor. And policy at that time was, you know, that, you know, they were going to fight it regardless of what the evidence showed. And so we went to we had a hearing, and fortunately we won. And but again, that's another example that you're putting your life in somebody's hands. And well, thank God. I mean, the funny thing is, he was ready to take 10 years. And I was like, I told him, I said, nah, man, we're not going to do that. 10 years of his life. Can you imagine that? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Which one? The person that shot him first had immunity because he was subpoenaed, and then the prosecutor also told him, you have immunity. It was like a contract. And he asked him again, you really? And it was funny. He was like, yeah, that's the first time that's happened. Yeah.
Not that you say it, I want to tell you this, to answer your question about reckless display of a firearm. It's a misdemeanor unless you assault someone, and then it becomes a felony, right? And it happens a lot in cars, right? So had a case where a guy said, my client, he pointed a firearm at me. My client said, I did not point a firearm at him. He was driving his car at me, and I got my firearm ready, but I didn't point it at him. So was it pointed or not pointed? The prosecutor talked to the witness and said, I believe that he did this. I'm going to charge your client with the aggravated assault. Okay. We got to a deposition, and I started to ask the guy who was the alleged victim, what had you been doing that day? And he started to disclose to me his marijuana use for the day. And I said, okay, well, tell me a little bit about that. He goes, well, I wake up and I start smoking marijuana. All right. And I continue to smoke marijuana. I was like, all right. And I go, well, how much? He goes, 14. I go, 14 puffs? And he goes, no, 14 marijuana cigarettes. I said, this was throughout the whole day? He goes, that was the morning. I said, all right. And then he goes, then I passed out. I go, that I understand. And so I'm looking at this, and the prosecutor's kind of nodding along. I'm looking at the prosecutor are you hearing this? And I go, and then what'd you do then? He goes, well, then I went and got some McDonald's and sobered up. I go, I don't think that's how biology works, but okay. And then he goes, and then what'd you do? He goes, then I went to pick my kids up, and now I'm like, do I need to call Department of Children and Families now? And then he described how he smoked some more marijuana, just smokes all day. And I go, well, was this an unusual day? No, I've been doing this for 20 years. So, and I said, well, does this affect your memory or your perception? Goes, oh, yeah, terrible memory. It took that level of craziness to get a prosecutor to then go, well, maybe he didn't really see a firearm. I go, you think? Who knows what he was seeing? But again, to go back to your point, is that the reasonableness is going to be judged by these prosecutors and judges down the line. And so, again, the message I think we're both trying to say is, if you're young and you don't want to lose your teenage years and your 20s and your 30s, don't have a gun. And if you do, make sure you're doing it in a way that is lawful. And if you have any questions about how to do that, call us, and we'll talk that through with you. Rather, talk to people ahead of time and avoid getting arrested. I would much rather give someone some advice so that they don't get arrested. I'd be okay if I never got hired again for another gun case again. We would both be okay with that. No, that's a good question. The concealed weapons permit is something you would have to get yourself. You have to take the course. You have to go do the proficiency testing, and then you have to do the application. So what might happen is you might have something in your history that prevents you from getting it. Your spouse might have it. Since you've asked that question, and I think it ties in, some people might live with a person who can't own a firearm. Okay? And this is an important consideration. Years ago, I had a friend who no longer lived in town who was a criminal defense lawyer. And he had this case. Husband, convicted felon, wife was not. Wife had a firearm, he did not. Technically speaking, that's allowed as long as the husband doesn't possess the firearm. Possession is knowledge, means I know it's here, and control of it, right? Like, I know Miss Annette's purse is right there, but we know what would happen if I went to go grab her purse. She would not be happy with me. I have knowledge of it, but I don't possess her purse, right? I don't have control over it. So in a jointly occupied home, a wife may have a firearm that she controls. The husband may know about it, but he can't have control over it. Well, unfortunately, they heard some noises out front that sounded like someone breaking into their home. So what happened? She said, "Get the gun, go deal with it." It was law enforcement trying to get into their home. So this did not end well. Thank goodness no one was injured. But now you have a convicted felon holding a firearm. So, that's not a workaround. You can't say, well, I'm not allowed to have a firearm, but you are, so you have the firearm in the house. Because if you hand it to someone who's not allowed, then you're in trouble. Is that a hand going up?
If you're pulled over by law enforcement and you possess a firearm, are you required by law to disclose that information?
That's a great question. Here's my take on it. You will be taught in your concealed weapons class that you need to tell law enforcement about it. My interpretation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution says that you do not need to tell law enforcement that you have a firearm in that car, okay? Now, understand, be very careful where your hands are, be very careful how you're interacting with law enforcement, because while I think I'm correct about the Fourth Amendment, there are also practical, real-world realities where if anyone thinks that you're reaching for something, it may be the last thing that you see, right? So you got to be very careful about that. What I tell people is, if you are a concealed weapons permit holder and you've got it, and if it's not visible, I don't think that you have to disclose it. If an officer asks you that question, I would not lie to the officer about it, but I think you have every right to say, I'm not discussing that with you. And I think you'll be taught differently in the concealed weapons. You're getting the Fourth Amendment analysis from an attorney.
And I just want to add a little bit of what Nick was saying. I think it's important too, especially young black men, is when you're dealing with law enforcement to describe exactly what you're doing. I remember many years ago, I was late for a depot, so I'm speeding through Levy County, driving 30 miles an hour. And it was not a good, smart move, but, and Williston, and I'm, when I got stopped, I think they were gonna take me in custody or what have you. But anyway, so it worked out well. One of the things that I did when the officer came up, and I told him I was late for a meeting. I was late for actually some of your officers I'm about to depose. Do you mind? I'm going to make a phone call. I'm going to grab my phone. I'm going to use the cell phone, and I'm going to make a phone call. Do you mind if I do that? And I think it's important to teach your kids to have those type of conversations so that everyone's on the same page and there's no misunderstanding about furtive movement, because at the end of the day, the most important thing is survival. I remember when my first introduction to Gainesville was being stopped on Waldo Road in Waldo. And I'll never forget this. I mean, I just moved to Gainesville to work at the state attorney's office. And one of the officers approached, and another buddy of mine was in the passenger seat, and he had his hands on his gun hip. And I remember he was like, where are you going? I was like, well, I'm just moving into Gainesville. Where are you going to work? State attorney's office. Really? Who's the state attorney? Rod Smith. Oh, okay. So there's the law, but we also got to teach our kids survival. The idea is we want them to come home. And so just be mindful of that too.
Yeah, I think in piggybacking on that, it's been my perception that if you tell an officer there's a gun in the car, you're just heightening the situation. So, if you legally you do not need to say it. Obviously, my advice would be to not have it visible in the car. To have it in a center console. If you don't have a concealed carry permit, it needs to be in an enclosed case. It needs to be in a case that clips or zips or locks. Don't have it in the stuck between the car, and that would be the way that I would do it. Even with the new carry law, I would not have a firearm visible in the car because I think you are running the risk of escalating, not anything you did wrong, but escalating a situation to something very dangerous.
If you're going down
The question is a good question. Is when they run you on a traffic stop, will it show up that you have a concealed weapons permit? So what I believe they will run you through is a system called David, which is a database that has that. I don't know if it's going to show you have a concealed weapons permit. It's going to show whether or not you have a valid driver's license. They then, a lot of times what we hear when we watch these videos is they will then radio in to do things like warrant checks and other checks like that. So I don't know that David is going to pull that up for the concealed weapons permit. I don't know if you have any different information. They'll do a lot of things called like an FCIC and an NCIC check. And so what will happen is, unfortunately, part of our job is watching like hours of body cams and dash cam videos. You know about these that I have to request from you, sir. And so, we're watching these videos and you hear the checks happen, but those are usually radioed into like a dispatch where they're getting that information. So it's possible they could find that out. If they, again, just because an officer is asking a question doesn't mean it has to be answered. I wouldn't lie about it, but it's a very difficult thing, but it's okay to say something like, I don't want to talk about that. Now, if it's get out of the car or something, if it's a lawful command, then you do need to follow that. Good question. Any other questions for us? All right, well, good. Well, that's a good question. Let me repeat the question so everyone can hear it. The question is, let's say you get stopped, and then an officer says, do you have a gun? And then something happens where the officer is now searching the vehicle. Will he get mad, or will it make it worse? Is that the question? So let's first say, if the officer asks for permission to search the vehicle, what should the answer be? No. And I know that's uncomfortable. And the instinct, because this is how we've been taught and raised, is, well, if I cooperate, maybe it'll be better. It won't be. It won't be. They're not looking to do you any favors. Now, I'm not anti-police. I'm just saying they're not looking to do you a favor. If they're asking to search, it's because they're trying to develop something. Now, if they say, I'm going to search, or it's not a question, it's I'm doing this, don't resist at the scene. Don't fight. Don't say. You can say I don't consent, and then leave it alone. And then talk to lawyers like us who can go into courtrooms and fight that. I've always said this, especially to young kids. The side of the road is not the place to have the motion to suppress the evidence. Okay. But it is the place to clearly and plainly say things like, no, you can't search. I don't want to speak without a lawyer present. Those are constitutional rights that we all have. The Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment guarantee us these very important rights. So it's important to say, and I think in your example, the officer said, can I search? The answer is no. Now, even though marijuana is lawful for some people to possess, if they have a medical marijuana license, if the car smells like marijuana, that's probable cause to search the vehicle. That's important to know. Even if you have a medical marijuana license, it's probable cause to search the vehicle, right? And if during the commission of searching the vehicle, or if a dog sniffs it and alerts, which, I mean, sometimes the alert is the dog sat, sometimes the dog didn't sit. It's like, what is the alert? Whatever. But if a dog alerts and they get into the car, do I think it will escalate things? No. I mean, it's just another piece of evidence. I think the thing that would escalate is if there was any movement in the car, just like he even said. When he wanted to look for his cell phone, he said to the officer, I need to make a phone call. Are you okay if I reach and get my phone? That very deliberate way of doing things was what de-escalated the situation. I think quick movements to things like in the bags or center consoles or under seats, that's going to escalate the situation. I think if they find there's a firearm and you just didn't say anything, remember I said don't lie, but you don't have to answer those questions.
And one of the things I wanted to add too is that we got to teach our kids that the magic word I tell when I speak is, am I free to go? Okay, because what happens is that a lot of times law enforcement like to operate in the areas of ambiguity where you think you're stuck. And then you just stay there, you wait, and there's you're not certain exactly where you stand. So we've got to teach our kids to ask that simple question, because then it becomes, you do have probable cause to keep me from leaving. And cussing them out is not going to do anything. But that magic word, am I free to go, that lets you know right away that you're not free to go, and there's an investigation that's happening. So it really lets you know exactly where you stand.
Any other questions for us? Thank you for this thought. Yes.
It's not necessarily about guns, but we were talking about searching the car. And this is like a particular thing that happened with me. So I live in an area where it's only, you don't go out one or two ways. And if the police are looking for somebody, they're going to stop and cut it off. I live on a house where the lights are going to wake me up. Is searching the car without consent the same as flashing a light through the windows of my car?
It's an interesting question. So the question is searching the car without consent the same as shining a light into your car to see what's visible? Is that right?
Right.
Okay. I think what most courts, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, I think most courts would say that if something is in plain view, so if I can just see it on your floorboard, or I can see it in your passenger seat, even with the aid of a flashlight outside, that most courts would say that that's not a search that violates the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. That I would have to go into the vehicle and start, really searching. So where we see this, and it's kind of ridiculous, is, well, in plain view, there was marijuana shake on the floor. So this gave me the right to now search everyone and everything in a square mile. That's what I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you get what I'm saying.
Right. But his thing was, he asked me if he was looking for people that the car had been broken into. Was obvious that my car had not been broken into.
Yeah.
So he was looking at my car and my grandmother's car and my grandfather's truck. So we were like, this is really broken. The first time he was standing in the street, walking in the yard. I wanted that. It was 3 o'clock in the morning too. So.
Yeah, maybe going into your yard, depending on where the vehicles were located. An officer can walk onto a yard that's not fenced. I think the phrase is sort of like the post person would go, or years ago before Amazon, like the salesperson would go. Now we just get all of our boxes. Or think about how the Amazon delivery guy delivers boxes. An officer could walk through a yard that way. If it's fenced, or if they're coming past a barrier where you're clearly trying to protect for some privacy, you might have a better argument. Whether or not a parked car next to a home, an officer could come start shining a light in, that's probably a trickier question, but I would say just shining a light and looking at things that are plain view is probably not going to be considered a search. I don't know if you have a different thought.
No, I agree with what Nick is saying. Is typically, if it's in plain view, that's permissible. Again, there's a lot of, some of these officers do have some great eyesights, apparently. They can see through certain things. But but that's what you're really looking at is if it's in plain view.
Any other questions that we can add or answer tonight? Pastor Thorpe, I want to say thank you. This is thank you. And I know you've said some kind things about our law firm, and even thank you for being here. I can just tell you for myself, from Dan Glassman, the opportunity to be part of your family and to do this over the last few months has been really a blessing, and I thank you for that. And we will be here anytime that you'll have us, and I thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Would you again help me give our presenters a rousing round of applause? This has been so rich. And I know we had 3 that we did in this series. I'm already anticipating 2024.
All right.
And I think one of the things we'll discuss in 2024 is simply how to respond and to behave during traffic stops specifically. I think is going to be very important. One of the things I wanted to share as I was listening, I think for a lot of us, certainly for someone like myself, you get to make the choice on the kind of environment you may be in and decide whether or not you feel compelled to own a firearm for concealed carry. Some of us have that luxury of being able to make those decisions. I wanted to speak specifically to young people and their parents who may feel that they are in an environment where a firearm is not an option, it's a necessity. And for those who are feeling that if you don't have one, there's this old adage that says, I would rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6.
Amen.
And I know that for a lot of young people in a lot of environments, they feel the need to have some form of protection. One of the things, because there's so many regulations tied to what those consequences can be. I learned tonight the difference between assault and battery. I'm so used to hearing the terms used together, but it was very helpful to understand that assault can involve not touching someone at all, but putting them at a certain level of fear. That's a minute threshold. That's a small threshold to be convicted of harming someone without touching them at all, and to know that other people are going to be making these decisions on your behalf. And if a firearm is present, then mandatory minimums can become associated with that. So I wanted to say to parents and young people especially, that there's so much that we need to be fighting for on behalf of our children, to work to create safe and healthy environments so we're not living in constant fear of our lives. I know we see a lot on the news, even for folks who live in neighborhoods where guns aren't necessarily going off around the clock, but you're a little more aware when you go to the store, when you go to the gas station, because of things that you see and things that you hear. So we've learned a lot tonight on how aware we need to be, but I did want to mention that there's some folks who are stuck in an environment where they feel they have no choice. And I want to continue to do as much as we can as a church and certainly as a community servant to make life as good for people as we can so that we're not living in constant fear. This has been so rich, and we're so thankful for all of you in the building and those who are joining us from home. Let's pray and we're done for tonight. Lord, we thank you for what our eyes have seen, what our ears have heard, what our hearts have felt. Thank you for the moving of your Spirit who has rested upon the altars of our hearts. As we depart from this place, go before us, follow along behind us, hold us in the palm of your hand. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you all so much. Look forward to seeing you Sunday morning at 9:15.